Welcome in, Draft Nicks, to the latest episode of Draft Nation. I'm Chris Mack. How you doing? We have got a good one for you today. Don't forget that whatever's going on with your favorite teams, doesn't matter if it's NBA, NHL. I know the seasons are only about a month old there, but lots of teams already figuring out what they're going to be or not be and trying to figure out a path forward into the future. We've got it there. NFL past the trade deadline, but trying to figure out if your team's a playoff team or not. And if it isn't, who's getting fired and who's the future? What kind of college players do you need to keep an eye on for next spring's draft? And, of course, hot stove season. Although it doesn't get heated up nearly as soon as it used to back in the day, it's simmering. The back burners are starting to warm up. All of your favorite teams. Go to draftnation.com, create a free account today, and you'll stay up to date on all of them and all the other teams in those leagues as well. I mentioned the hot stove maybe starting to warm up. Who better to talk to about baseball than from MLBPipeline.com and MLB.com, Jonathan Mayo. Jonathan, thanks for taking the time today.
I really appreciate how much you stretched the hot stove metaphor there, Chris.
I did. Probably a little too far, right?
It's simmering. We're turning the burners up. What else you want to do? It's on. Keep warm.
Somebody light the pilot. Somebody make sure the gas is on. I could go with all the cheesy hot stove analogies. But yeah, when you've got a guy like Juan Soto sitting around and nobody's seemingly too interested yet in getting that done. You know,
everyone's interested. Come on.
That's true. Everyone's interested. This is the old Scott Boras method of turning off the gas, I guess, if we're going to keep the analogy going until the flame gets lit, probably just after the holidays sometime. But let's focus on team building with some of the younger players, especially. And I want to start with Rookie of the Year because that was awarded in the last week or so. Paul Skeens, I don't think a huge surprise. Maybe it's because we're in the Pittsburgh area, so maybe in our corner of the world, it wasn't especially a big surprise. I know people in Southern California may have been upset that Jackson Merrill didn't win, but here nor there. Skeens on the NL side, Luis Gil on the AL side. And then I mentioned Jackson Merrill, Colton Cowser, Jackson Chourio are all household names now for baseball fans anyway. But aside from maybe the biggest names, who were some of the rookies that impressed you the most this year while maybe remaining just under the radar of that top tier?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I actually had a National League Rookie of the Year vote, and I did vote Skeens, Merrill, Chourio in that order. So that's worth. There were a lot of good rookies to consider. And I think any of them would have been good. And I think had Yamamoto not gotten hurt, we might be having a very different discussion right now. In terms of guys who surprised that were under the radar, I think some of the guys that are sort of interesting are some of the relievers. Okay. Who, in Cleveland, I'm trying to think of, it was Kate Smith, I think was one. He's kind of front of mind because we do and we may talk about this in a minute, sort of sleeper prospects, unranked guys who get added to 40-man rosters. And Cade was a guy who was not on Cleveland's 40-man roster a year ago, and he gets added and then was one of the better relievers and a really, really good bullpen that helped them, play into the postseason. Beyond that, I don't know if Mason Wynn counts as under the radar. I feel like he didn't get the due that he deserved, mostly because the Skeens and the brothers Jackson, were so good and kind of stood out so much. But Mason Wynn, aside from having the most ridiculous throwing arm from shortstop you'll ever see, and I think he's going to go on to win some Gold Gloves there. He's such a good defender, but he was more productive offensively than I think a lot of people realized. He had 15 homers, he stole 11 bases. He was right behind Merrill and Chourio in a lot of offensive categories. So he's a guy that I think people need to keep an eye on. And then I'll throw out one more name. Wilyer Abreu from Boston was a guy who, when I didn't have an American League vote, but we do a lot of talk on, at MLB Pipeline and on our Pipeline podcast about like who we think should win Rookie of the Year.
Right.
And I looked at Abreu for I was like, well, he had a better year than I realized. Again, good run production. He had 33 doubles and 15 homers. We'll see what happens with the swing and miss with him going forward. But that's another guy that I was like, oh, he was better than I had anticipated.
Do you suspect that? And you mentioned the relievers that made a big impact. Aside from Cade Smith, Mason Miller obviously had a huge year. I'm trying to think, and there was that argument very early on in the year about whether he was rookie eligible or not. But you mentioned the Guardians bullpen, Hunter Gaddis. I'm trying to think of some others. Garcia in Washington, Robert Garcia had a good year. Estrada in San Diego ended up being a decent arm out of the bullpen. Do you suspect that ends up being more of a trend going forward? Or is this maybe just a one-off this year?
I think it's cyclical. It's not that once upon a time, and if you remember, like teams used to ease guys in the bullpen, and who are eventually going to be starters. I guess the Tigers did it. I won't say easing Jackson Jobe in, because there he was pitching, with the bases loaded in a playoff game. But but he's going to be a starter moving forward. So if that were the case, if it was a bunch of guys like that, then I could see that continuing. I think what teams are recognizing is the ability to develop relievers. Relievers way back when used to just be failed starters, and now you have guys who are relievers the second they enter pro ball. And I think teams are recognizing that you can put together a bullpen on the cheap, relatively, by doing it, with homegrown players. I mean, listen, and Cleveland has been a primarily homegrown roster overall, so that kind of fits. I think the Tigers, you saw a lot of young pitchers coming in with their kind of chaos pitching rotation and things like that, with a lot of young arms. So I think you are seeing more than that. It'll be interesting to see if and how that impacts the free agent market when it comes to relievers. I do think that there's still going to be value for a guy who has proven track record, especially if you're looking to win. But I think, and here we're both here in Pittsburgh. I think for years and years, it didn't really matter who's in the general manager's chair. They've shown here that you can put together a bullpen either with homegrown guys or guys off the scrap heap. Who have the stuff that can play well back into bullpens.
One last player I wanted to pivot back to real quick before we move on to a big name coming in this offseason. Wyatt Langford was talked about a ton going into the year last year. For those into betting on these kind of things, he was one of the favorites for AL Rookie of the Year early in the year. Struggled early on, picked it back up late in the year. There was a lot of ups and downs, which is probably more realistic to expect of a rookie, especially a rookie with so many eyes on him and in a spot coming off of the season that the Rangers were coming off of. It was understandable. Langford, a case of, hey, don't expect your rookies to just come flying out of the gate and keep it up all year. Maybe a little bit of a lesson learned for all of us, or is this maybe more indicative of just what kind of player he's going to be, maybe inconsistent at times?
No, he the funny thing is someone had told you after the 2023 draft, remember he was just drafted a year ago, a year and a half ago, whatever it is now, right? That he would spend the entire year in the big leagues and finish the year with 16 homers and 19 steals. You'd be like, okay, that sounds.
I'll sign on for that. Yeah,
I'll sign on for that. And I think because of what he did in his first summer and how insanely good he was right out of the gate, that set the stage for him to make that team on opening day. That raised the expectation bar, and probably a little bit too much. But to his credit and to the Rangers' credit, one, they didn't sort of cut their losses and send them back down. And two, he righted the ship and figured it out. He is an incredibly talented hitter. I have 100% faith in his ability to continue to make the adjustments that we saw after he kind of got out of that, rut. I don't see him as an inconsistent performer. He can really hit, and he's athletic, and that doesn't just help him in terms of, running around the outfield or stealing some bags, but, being athletic in the box, can help you make adjustments. This is not just a guy who's coming and swinging out of his shoes and is going to strike out 1,000 times and you hope he hits 40 homers. He has a chance to be a really, really gifted hitter. I think we're just beginning to see the start of what's going to be a very good career for Wyatt Langford.
A couple of the names that I purposely excluded when talking about rookie impact, Imanaga and Yamamoto, mostly because they both came over with not insignificant levels of experience in Japan. So let's pivot to the guy that everybody's going to be talking about this offseason, Roki Sasaki. What's he going to be able to provide right out of the gate at the major league level? And do you think there will be an adjustment or transition period for him? And if so, how long does it last?
I don't know that there's one like formula for Japanese pitchers who come to the big leagues, and it could depend. And he is young. Mm-hmm. But Shohei Ohtani didn't exactly struggle when he first came. And, everything that I've heard now, so Sasaki's stuff was down a little bit in 2024 compared to the previous year. I don't know if he was just learning to pitch, and the crazy thing is people are like, well, we need to figure that out. So instead of throwing 100, he's averaging 97 miles an hour on his fastball. So I'm like, that's still going to play. And I don't know if you've seen any video on him. I don't know how anyone ever hits his splitter. It's the most ridiculous pitch I've ever seen. I encourage people to go and check. The Pitching Ninja does those overlays, and you see the splitter and the fastball together, and he tunnels them so it looks exactly the same, and the splitter just falls off the table. And I'm like, how do you recognize that or ever see it? He, depending on where he goes, he's going to step right into a big league rotation right out the gate. Mm-hmm. And I expect him to have some success. There can be an adjustment. The balls in Japan are different. I think that's one of the things that people need to adjust to. I actually talked to one of his teammates in Japan who had pitched here in the States for a number of years, James Dykstra, and he was saying that he had to adjust to the Japanese ball. So there will be an adjustment, but give him an entire an off season. It wouldn't shock me if he's working out with the Major League Baseball right now. So he's ready to do that. And, if he goes to the Dodgers, which is what everyone is sort of expecting, then he doesn't even have to come in and be the guy. He doesn't have to be the Japanese guy, right? He'll be number 3. Because remember, Ohtani's going to come back to pitch. You've already got Imanaga there. So it's, you've got Yamamoto there. I was just looking at rookie stats. Imanaga had a really good year for Chicago. So, he has a chance to be really good right out of the gate, and I imagine he will be. I don't know if pitching every 5th day. They'll have to be, wary of that, and they'll probably manage the workload a little bit in the first year over. Not that he's been hurt, really, but I think they're going to want to be. There'll be an abundance of caution, I would think, to an extent, to make sure that he can sort of integrate coming here. Now, if he goes someplace other than the Dodgers, and to me, the only reason he does that is if he wants to be the man.
Yeah.
And that, that also would be a good thing. Like, all right, this guy who wants it. And let's say he goes to San Diego or San Francisco or, one of the other teams that, people are talking about, though, maybe he would go to. He has the stuff to front a rotation. And I don't think he's going to shy away from that spotlight. Anyone who saw him in the World Baseball Classic knows that he wants the ball in those situations. So I think he'll have success. I mean, could there be ups and downs? Sure. I mean, he's like any, let's say, Paul Skeens, if you want to sort of compare that, like, not that he had many ups and downs once they brought him up, but like there is the possibility that if the league adjusts to you, it may take a minute. And so, but I don't expect him to have too many difficulties. We did some stuff on, early candidates for 2025 Rookie of the Year. And it was with the caveat that wherever he signs, whichever league, Roki Sasaki immediately becomes the front runner for Rookie of the Year in whichever league he signs.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because at least what I've read sounds like he's all about embracing the challenge, and that's why he wants to come over now.
Yep.
And it's why they've allowed him to come over in the method that they have, even at this age and this experience level. And so that would tell me, hey, I want to be the man, like you said, in a place like San Diego or San Francisco, rather than going to LA and maybe seeking a little bit of comfort, for lack of a better way to put it, being surrounded by some countrymen, being on a team where you're only the third guy in the rotation, maybe.
Right. But if you're picking a place where you think you have the best chance to win a bunch of jewelry,
yeah,
I don't know that you go anyplace else. And it's not going to be, you know, for people checking this out, it's not going to be about money out of the gate. Because he fits under the international bonus structure, no one's going to be able to pay him a lot right away.
Right.
You know, so people were like, oh, the Dodgers, you know, they have money left over this year. I think he'll be posted officially for next year's signing period, and a lot of that money is already allocated by teams. But let's say even the Dodgers saved all that money. That's only $5 million. This isn't, you know, it's not Yamamoto. You know, now teams are not allowed to have discussions. But if I'm, you know, if I'm his agent and I'm like, well, which team is most likely to sign him to a really good extension after, say, a year or even 2 years? It's going to be the Dodgers. I mean, you know, the Padres, you know, are willing to spend money, and there are the other teams. I know he met with the Red Sox. You know, so there are other teams who you'd be able to sort of guess that they're going to be good, but the Dodgers have the track record of spending as much money as it takes to win.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch how it plays out. And like you said, instant rookie of the year favorite in whichever league he ends up in. Let's bring it back to the prospect level. Arizona Fall League just wrapped up last weekend. Who opened the most eyes, in your opinion? I saw you ranked the top 10 from the Arizona Fall League, but maybe guys that weren't expected to be eye openers, or guys that went out and sort of stamped their already high esteem while they were out in the desert.
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of those guys. I think the guy who probably jumped the most. Well, let me start with the guy who sort of was as good as we thought he might be, but we didn't know because he hadn't played in a long time. That's Andrew Painter with the Phillies, who was number one on the list that my colleague Jim Callis put out. You know, he had Tommy John surgery, and the timing of missing time before he had surgery and then having surgery, he's missed 2 years. And he was, you know, he had all 4 pitches working. He missed bats with all of them. He touched 100 with his fastball. His curveball was outstanding. He's got an upper 80 slider that's kind of a newer pitch. It's a harder breaker that's really good. And his changeup, when he needed it, was also really good. So he's got feel already for 4 pitches. I think we're going to see him in the big leagues at some point next year. I think the guy who probably maybe jumped the most has got to be Josue Briseño of the Tigers. And he's just number 9 on their top 30. He won the MVP. He was the first ever Triple Crown winner, maybe the best offensive performance ever in Arizona Fall League history. And this isn't a hitting friendly league always, but, you know, 433, he had a 1376 OPS, you know, 10 homers. He's the first guy to double-digit homers. He's a big physical guy. It's kind of crazy. He used to be a catcher. He's not going to catch. I put him at first base and let that bat play. And the thing that was amazing is he was like crazy hot out of the gate. And then I was there for 2 weeks, and I saw him, and he didn't, even when he didn't do that much, he was barreling up the baseball regularly. He has a good approach. Was not a ton of swing and miss. The pitching wasn't great, so you don't want to put too much weight into any fall league performances, Chris. But he's the guy who I was like, "Oh, I can't wait to see what he does next year." Knowing that there have been plenty of guys who've kind of gone in the fall league and put up huge numbers, and then we never hear from them again.
Yeah, and 40-man rosters got set this past week as well. Anything that jumped off the page for you in regards to anybody who was protected or left unprotected?
You know, nothing that really jumps. You know, Caleb Durbin's sort of an interesting guy with the Yankees. He's sort of tying it back to the fall league. He set the record for stolen bases. And I bring him up because, one, he had a back-to-back really good fall leagues, But Yankees general manager Brian Cashman, kind of on 2 different occasions, brought up Durbin a bit unsolicited as a potential internal candidate to be their second baseman on opening day. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but he also talked to him about him being impactful in some way for the big league team in 2025, and I think that's extremely possible. He's shown the ability to play second and third. He's played some outfield. I think that because of that, like, he's a guy, he's kind of a spark plug, and I think he's the kind of player that you see on winning teams, who just do the little things. And I think he can hit, he can run, he'll run through a wall to help you win. There's nothing major that, like, oh, I can't believe they didn't protect this guy.
Okay.
Since we've been tracking, every single top 100 guy who is up gets protected. I think, if I'm going to throw out a couple guys that I thought, oh, maybe he has a chance to be protected, I'll stay here in Pittsburgh. Sammy Ciani, who's Michael's younger brother. I have some, recency bias because I saw him in the fall league a bunch.
I was going to say, he just had a big fall league, didn't he?
And it's more than just the big fall league. I mean, he was stuck in Greensboro. I mean, he spent parts of 3 years in Greensboro, and that's, you never want to spend that much time in one place. And he wasn't putting up numbers. He was a pretty high pick over slot. His brother spent the year pretty much playing center field every day for the Cardinals. Gold Glove caliber defensive outfielder. And then Sammy had gotten caught in the sort of trying to leverage his swing. He was really steep. I think maybe, I don't know if he bought into the launch angle, trying to do too much. It probably snowballs too. Like, you find yourself in Greensboro for a second year and like, oh, and he changed his swing path and he flattened it out and went back to being the guy that if you saw him, this is who he should be, right? He gets on base, he works counts. He still was driving the ball, and barreling it up. He can run. He can play all 3 outfield positions. I think the Pirates' calculation was that because he had just gotten to Double-A, even if someone takes him, he's not going to stick in the Rule 5 draft.
Okay.
But if you told me that he ends up in Pittsburgh at second half of next year, assuming he's with the, I could believe it. I don't think he's a starting outfielder anywhere. Although, like, if, say, he had to play center field for 2 weeks because someone's hurt, he's not going to embarrass you. He's a good defender, and because he's got an ability to put the ball in play and he can run. Like, he brings a lot of things to the table that I kind of like.
So which organizations do you think, you mentioned you were just out there in Arizona for a couple of weeks, but beyond just the last few weeks, overall, which organizations do you think are doing the best job with their young talent right now? Whether it's the development of that young talent, picking and choosing the right spots to bring them to the major league level and how they contribute, as we talked about with some of those bullpen arms earlier, or maybe just using some of that young talent in their pipeline to go out and get the major league talent that they're ready to utilize, especially if you think about it, the trade deadline. And
I mean, I think you can probably come up with different organizations for the different parts of those questions.
Yeah.
And I think some teams are good at developing certain things. The Pirates are good at developing pitching, but not hitting. I'll go back to the Dodgers. I think they're good at doing all of it, and they have the ability to use money if somebody fails, then go out and get a free agent. But they're very good at the high end of winning and continuing to build their farm system. They realize the importance of it, even if they use some of those players for trades. Case in point, the Tigers, who I think their farm system is getting more and more interesting. They got Tyrone Lorenzo, a young catcher who I just saw in the fall league from the Dodgers, and he has a chance to be really, really good. And that might be a win-win because Jack Flaherty helped the Dodgers, get to where they got to. Right. Even if he was up and down in the postseason, he had a really good year. The Dodgers, I think, are really good at getting the most out of their arms. Cleveland, I think, is really good at finding pitchers, maybe not first rounders, but Shane Bieber, Tanner Bybee, are all guys that came a little bit later, and then they tease more velocity and they become much more interesting. I think those are the teams that I really point to. And then you look at like the Tampa Rays, or well, I guess they'll still be in Tampa in 2025, even though they don't have a home stadium. But they've been very good, I think, at being competitive in that AL East, where you have the Red Sox and the Yankees throwing money at everything, and the Rays aren't able to do that, but they stay competitive and through drafting and and then internationally, and then more than anything, they are geniuses at getting throw-ins in trades that no one's ever heard of. We always joke that if the Rays call about a trade and it's like big leaguer for a minor leaguer, and they're like, hey, why don't you throw that guy in the complex league in? You need to hang up the phone. Because I mean, it's the amount of, Junior Caminero, who has a chance to be a superstar and was one of the he's no longer a prospect, but he was a top 5 prospect, and he can really he was a throw-in in a trade who was just starting out in the United States. So they're really good at identifying players and then developing them and allowing them to turn into the big leaguers that we see them help compete in the AL East.
It's something to see, just the I guess we could call it the Andrew Friedman complex, the system maybe of, and how some teams have perfected it, whether it's in Tampa without as much money, or in LA, Friedman himself with now God's money to spend, perfected his system, and other teams not being able to figure out how to work it, whether they have the money or don't. They can't, they don't have the same eye.
Right. I mean, and think about it. Andrew Friedman did what he did in Tampa, and then suddenly he went to LA with some of the same ideas, but they opened up the treasure chest. Exactly. So, and not to give, it's not just him. I mean, the staff that they have in place, Billy Gasparino has been a scouting director for a long time. He does a really good job in Los Angeles. Will Rhimes is the farm director. They do incredible work in developing players. And the thing is that they can be patient, right? Because they know that there isn't a need to rush a guy to the big leagues.
Yeah.
To your earlier point about which teams are good at deciding when to bring guys up. Sometimes you just have to, because we have a need. Sometimes there's the pressure, if you feel like you're on the hot seat and like, when we need to create some buzz, so we better bring this guy up. And sometimes that happens too soon. And then listen, sometimes you don't know. Mike Trout, I love using this example all the time. His first go around in the big leagues, he was awful. And then they sent him back down. And this was after like a huge years in the minors, and they sent him back down, and he adjusted, and then he came back and was Mike Trout, right? But like it's not a guarantee slam dunk, even if a guy's the best prospect in baseball, that it's going to work right away. That doesn't mean you give up. The amount of questions we get of, oh my God, should we readjust? Like, is this guy not as good as we thought? I'm like, slow down. Like, let's see. You have to give a little bit of runway, even though it's a results-oriented business. But the Dodgers have the benefit of being able to like wait if they don't think a guy is ready, because they can go out and get a player if they need to, even if it's for short term.
It's just wild too to see them walk into every year with seemingly 2 rotations worth of arms. And by the time they get to October, they're down to 3 or 4 guys. They're throwing bullpen games out in the World Series.
Well, and then there's some guy who like is coming off, came off of Tommy John surgery that people completely forgot about. Yeah. And then they come back and you're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and even guys, I'm not even talking about like the Walker Buehlers of the world. And that was insane. But it's, guys in the minors that's like they find guys in the draft, or via trade or whatever it is, and suddenly they turn into a rotation piece or that 7th inning monster or the multi-inning reliever, whatever it is, that they seem to find them and find the right spots for them.
You mentioned the Pirates earlier and how they develop young arms, and we're sitting here talking about arms and a wealth of arms being a positive thing. So let's talk about what next year looks like for their rotation. Obviously, Skeens, Keller, Jones. We don't know what the back end will look like, if they'll go out and get a veteran arm or not, but they've got a lot of young arms coming up as well, ready to make major league impact. Braxton Ashcraft, Thomas Harrington, of course, Bubba Chandler. Do you see those guys making that impact this year? And does it give the Pirates an opportunity to maybe be one of those teams that jumps from 70-win territory to wild card territory based on the depth of starting arms that they'll have this year?
I mean, the short answer is yes, with the caveat you still have to score runs. Ideally, yeah, but with that kind of pitching and that pitching depth, I think all three of those guys will have the opportunity to contribute. I think that, and they're all kind of different. I'm not exactly sure what Braxton Ashcraft is. Like, he may end up being a high leverage reliever, and that's fine. By the way, that's not between where his stuff is and the injury history, I could see him ending up in the bullpen. Bubba Chandler is the one that I think everyone should be the most excited about, and I think if you told me that he's going to follow a Skeens-like path and he's up in May, sure. If you told me that he's so good in spring training and the Pirates see what happened with Skeens and not getting the draft pick and losing the year of service time anyway,
yeah,
would they say maybe he should be part of this rotation right out of the gate? And yeah, I can believe it. And then you've got Harrington, who kind of it sounds like a backhanded compliment when you constantly talk about a guy's feel for pitching.
Right.
He really throws strikes.
Just tell me how hard he throws.
Right. I mean, yeah. It's kind of like talking about a potential date as having good personality.
Yes.
It's not an either or. The thing is, Thomas Harrington's got good stuff. It's not like I think he may be better than people realize. Like, I think people see him as like, maybe he's like a number 4 or 5 starter. I'm like, yeah, I mean, pure stuff. First of all, when you're in the same organization as Paul Skeens, everyone is going to pale in comparison.
Yeah.
But Thomas Harrington, it's sort of, now I'm not saying he's Greg Maddux. I don't want to get like people saying like, what are you doing? But people sort of especially in retrospect, gave Greg Maddux kind of short shrift because he was Greg Maddux. His stuff was good. Like, in his heyday, he was still throwing 95, but he could put it on a dime. Harrington's got like 4 pitches. He throws them all for strikes. He's really good. I think he's like a solid number 3. And then you don't know where it goes from there. Like, maybe he sounds like a number 3, but ends up being your most consistent starter. Now, as long as Paul Skeens is in your rotation, that's not going to be the case, but like, he has a chance to be really, really good. So I think, you're going to see all 3 of them in some roles, unless you use one of them to trade for a bat.
I was just going to say, yeah.
And maybe you do that because, they have some other options. Luis Ortiz, the way he looked at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. There's another young arm who, is not a prospect, but like looked like maybe the light switched on for good. Yeah. And we'll see. So they do have some options there, and they can even afford to wait and kind of see like what guys look like as the season goes on. I'm not, I don't know that you necessarily pull the trigger on a trade during the off season, because unless something presents itself, but you could sort of see where guys are at, and then if you're set with 5 or even 6 guys, say in the big leagues, who can start, and then you've got Ashcraft shoving in AAA but no place to put him,
right?
Then you can be like, oh well, we can shorten him up and put him in the bullpen to help us, or we can, his trade value is high because he's going out and taking the ball every 5th day. So I think they're going to have options in that regard.
And then a couple of southpaws coming behind him too, right? Solometo and Barco.
Yeah, I love Anthony Solometo. I don't know what happened to him. His stuff really backed up. And that's why like the results weren't there. And I don't know if he was trying to pitch through an injury. Like, I honestly don't know what happened. They're still very high on him. He, coming into last year, may have been a little bit ahead of Bubba Chandler in terms of what people thought of him. I think Chandler's ceiling was much higher because of how athletic he is. And, he still is getting used to pitching full time and only playing baseball. So there was so much ceiling, and then he started to get to the ceiling much faster. But Solometo's stuff kind of backed up. He could come into the spring and be fine, and then suddenly, boom, he's right there.
Yeah.
And the same with Hunter Barco, who's not that far removed from Tommy John. He's Have you ever seen him?
No.
He's really funky. And the thing that's sort of interesting with him is that they kind of tamed down his delivery a little bit because you want to avoid him re-injuring himself.
I was going to say he's the guy who had the crazy. Is it a weird motion, right?
Yeah, no, it's a lower slot and it's a funky. I mean, Solomedo too, by the way. Solomedo's like Bumgarner leg kick, and I mean it's not typical, but it kind of worked, and he like knew what he wanted to do. And Barco, I think they did a really good job of letting him be him, but sort of taming it down a little bit, because if you saw him in college, you're like, that guy's going to get hurt. Even to the untrained eye, like that doesn't look good. Now, there have been guys who do that in the big leagues for 15 years and never get hurt. Like, I don't know that you can necessarily predict, but I think they have found a way for him not to lose the deception in his delivery, which is a key part of what makes him good, but helping him maybe be a little smoother and a little less violent and a little less injury risky. So they may have found the best of both worlds. He's another guy, though, that like if you told me he ends up coming out of the bullpen, I could believe it.
Yeah.
Even though he seems to be able to throw enough strikes, so you don't want to pull the plug on a potential left-handed starter.
Right.
But that's the next wave, and that's not even like a full step behind. They're a half step behind. You may see the AAA Indianapolis might have a really good rotation at the start of the year, and that it's rare when you have a team that goes through a season with the same 5 or 6 guys. So it'll be good to have that both for trade possibilities, but also for depth to back up the big league team. And it's going to be needed, especially given that even if they make some roster moves and things like that, I don't expect the team to score, runs in bunches.
Before I let you run, Jonathan, because I've kept you long enough, I just wanted to real quick fast forward. Let's fast forward 11 months, maybe 10 months. Who are the players in the Rookie of the Year conversation when we get to next August and September?
Well, we just talked about this on our Pipeline podcast. I put Bubba Chandler in that conversation.
Okay.
Because of, like, if he follows that Skeens path, I could see him pitching well enough. I think that Matt Shaw of the Cubs is another guy who has a chance to do some damage. And I think, in the National League, it's easy, but Dylan Cruz is our number one prospect right now. Yeah. He was up. He showed that he can handle himself. He has a chance to be kind of like a 2020 guy. He doesn't it's crazy to say as our number one prospect, and the guy was the number 2 pick in the draft behind Skeens.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't wow you. He's just really, really good.
Yeah.
So that's in the National League. And then over in the American League, my nephew, Kobe Mayo.
Nepotism, I cry. Nepotism.
Yes, he is a Nepo baby. But they're going to have to – the one thing when trying to – the calculus for trying to figure this out is, are they ready, and is there the opportunity? I think Kobe Mayo is ready. Like, that power bat is ready. The Orioles now are, they're competing. They make the playoffs. Where are they going to play him?
Right.
They're going to have to find a way to get him into the lineup. So he's the guy who I think really, really jumps out the most. Jason Dominguez of the Yankees is another guy. And then the guy that I kind of like, I don't call him a sleeper, is Jacob Wilson, Jack's kid.
Oh yeah.
All he's done is hit. He does not swing and miss, but he swings at everything. So people are like, oh, is that going to work? It's kind of in a Luis Arias kind of way.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
The guy keeps winning batting titles, right? Like, Jacob Wilson is going to contend for batting titles. He just needs to stay healthy. He got banged up a lot last year, but this is a guy who was hitting 400 in the minors. And it was not, there was questions about impact. He's not going to hit a ton of homers, but he was hitting the ball hard enough. And it just works. Like, his approach works. And he's a good shortstop, right? So he's going to play a premium position and he's going to hit 300. So he's a guy and I assume that, if he's healthy, and he should be, he's going to be the A's shortstop from opening day. and he's going to play every day. And I think he's going to put up the kind of numbers that will look very good when it comes time to vote.
Enjoy Sacramento, kid. Don't forget, too, this time of year, you're looking to do some holiday shopping. If you have a fan of baseball in your life, Smart, Wrong, and Lucky, the origin stories of baseball's unexpected stars, available at Amazon.com. Jonathan Mayo is the author of that book. Highly recommended, again, for those of you that are interested in reading some great stories about players who maybe came out of nowhere. Some of those names we mentioned earlier, Jonathan. So there you go. A little holiday book. But who doesn't have somebody that could use a good book around the holidays?
That would be shameless self-promotion if I jumped in too much. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well worth it. And I really, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for going on the clock with us here at Draft Nation. Jonathan Mayo, check him out on social media at Jonathan Mayo on X, Jonathan Mayo MLB on Blue Sky. There's too many social media now. Yes. And Jonathan Mayo B3 on Threads. Just search Jonathan Mayo. How about that? Go to MLB.com and MLBPipeline.com as well. We appreciate the time, Jonathan.
Thanks, Chris. Anytime.
Absolutely.